You know how Jackie's father is a city councilman? Not anymore. He just got arrested for bribery. He could go to prison.
Well, I'm glad. That guy makes Republicans look like a bunch of crooks and greedy businessmen.
Yeah, well, thank God for the honest ones like Richard Nixon. Huh?
But from a presidential perspective, is there any possibility that the president would end up pardoning his son?
No.
Well, is there
I just said no. I just answered. Go ahead.
Here's my question. How the hell could you pardon Nixon?
This is Plausibly Live.
There is an old saying in the civil service: never believe anything until it has been officially denied. So once it's been denied, then you can probably go that way. With the Biden crime family story seem to be going faster and faster every day, one of the things being postulated now is that the president could issue a pardon for his son, Hunter. In fact, there are more and more people who are coming to believe that the president may have to issue one. And now that it's been officially denied, the maxim sort of tells us that it's probably true. Remember, press statements aren't delivered under oath, so there you go. Yes, it would be political suicide for the Biden presidency, but the consequences of not doing it, not issuing a pardon, if certain things don't happen, could be even more devastating, and for far more people than just the Bidens. Putting all that aside, though, why exactly is it that a president, any president, has almost plenary power? Now, what does that mean? Plenary power is unlimited. The pardon power is not plenary, but it almost is. And what exactly do presidents issue pardons for along the way? Well, we're not going to look at all of them, because there are well over almost 25,000 pardons. But George Washington issued 16 during his 8 years as presidency, almost all of which were for the Whiskey Rebellion folks, people who had rebelled over the whiskey tax, and George Washington, President of the United States, had actually gone into the field as the commander-in-chief of the armies to crush the Whiskey Rebellion. James Monroe pardoned pirates, men who had been convicted of piracy, probably on behalf of the United States, so, maybe he had to. James K. Polk pardoned one man who would go on to run for the presidency of the United States. He didn't win, but didn't have anything to do with the pardon. William Henry Harrison pardoned no one. He's one of two presidents that issued no pardons at all. Of course, in his case, the reason he didn't issue any pardons was because, well, he died, a month into his term, so he didn't really have a chance to issue any. Who knows if he would have actually done it or not. But for the moment, he did not. Millard Fillmore is an interesting guy. He's a president that doesn't get a lot of credit for anything. In fact, as Dave Barry once wrote, the primary accomplishment of the Millard Fillmore administration was that the Earth did not crash into the sun. But Millard Fillmore pardoned several men who had been convicted of transporting slaves, ... to freedom. That's kind of an interesting thing, and probably deserving of some additional study. James Buchanan pardoned Brigham Young over the Utah Wars, while Lincoln issued a lot of pardons, including over 200 for Dakota tribesmen who had been convicted in the Great Sioux Uprising. He also pardoned his wife's half-sister, who had been accused of favoritism towards the Confederacy. He's also famous for pardoning soldiers who had run away or shown cowardice in the face of the enemy. There's a great story about a woman who came to him because her son was going to be shot for desertion. And he wrote on a piece of paper, "Ma'am, take this to the general, give it to him." And it said very simply, "So-and-so, the man is not to be shot until I give the order to do it." And the woman was very upset about that. She said, "But you might change your mind tomorrow. And Lincoln said, ma'am, if the shooting of your son requires my approval, your son will live to be a great deal older than Methuselah. And the woman was very happy with that. Benjamin Harrison would make up for his grandfather's lack of pardons by issuing over 600 of them, most of them to LDS church members who had been convicted of polygamy. That's how Utah became a state, by the way. Later, Woodrow Wilson would pardon only one person that he had had convicted under the Espionage Act during World War I, but not Eugene Debs. He would leave that to Warren G. Harding, who was convicted for the same offense under that law. Over 4 terms, Franklin Roosevelt would pardon 3,687 people. His vice president, Harry Truman, would rack up another 2,044, making that time frame one of pretty much the record holder. And Ronald Reagan would actually convict a guy who had been convicted while working for the FBI of illegal break-ins. In other words, this guy was breaking into people's homes illegally, searching them. Was convicted of that. By the way, that guy was Mark Felt, who also turned out to be Deep Throat, the guy who, exposed Watergate, had been convicted of breaking and entering illegally while working for the government. For all of that, though, if you were to ask the average American on the street, there is literally only one pardon that anybody talks about. And that, of course, was September 8th, 1974, when Gerald R. Ford issued his pardon of Richard Nixon for crimes committed against the United States. It was very controversial at the time. I remember watching it on TV. The thing is, though, that as time has gone by, the wisdom of the framers has really shown through, particularly in that pardon. A trial of Richard Nixon would have torn the country apart. And one of the things that the framers are going to talk about is the fact that needs to be avoided. And so, thanks to Gerald Ford's pardon, we did. The pardon debate in the Constitutional Convention was actually very sharp, but very short. Franklin had mentioned, we got to be able to get away, we got to be able to get rid of a president, and that had kicked into that debate, and then we got into this. Well, what happens if a president starts issuing pardons? How do we do this? It came, of course, from Old England. The king had the power of pardon. And like us, it was not plenary. It was not total. In other words, there were limits on it. The king could not pardon anyone who had been impeached. And likewise, our framers would see the same wisdom of that. But they did have some arguments about it. George Mason, who would be one of the leading anti-federalists, he was a man who I think deserves a lot more study. Mason believed that we needed a new government. He just didn't like the Constitution. He didn't like the Constitution because it contained things like the presidential pardon. He said this: the presidential pardon power, quote, may be sometimes exercised to screen from punishment those whom he, the president, had secretly instigated to commit the crime and thereby prevent a discovery of his own guilt, unquote. Well, if you took out he and put in Nixon there, well, could it be? I mean, Nixon never pardoned the folks who were at Watergate, but did the pardon of Nixon do that? Moreover, in the current situation, would a pardon meet those criteria? But a pardon is seen as a measure of mercy. John Marshall would write, the Supreme Court Chief Justice would write, a pardon is an act of grace proceeding from the power entrusted with the execution of the laws, which exempts the individual on whom it is bestowed from the punishment of the law inflicts for a crime that he has committed. It is the private, though official, act of the executive magistrate. But what if there's something more to it? Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote, "A pardon is not a private act of grace from an individual who just happens to possess power. It is part of our constitutional scheme to provide this grace." And James Wilson would argue that a pardon before conviction might be necessary in order to obtain the testimony of witnesses. In other words, we're going to give you immunity, which is a form of pardon, so that you will testify. But it's Alexander Hamilton, the man of whom we have a musical where he dances on stage and teaches us American history, who wrote in the Federalist 74, that was sarcasm for those of you not keeping up, quote, "In seasons of insurrection or rebellion, there are often critical moments when a well-timed offer of pardon to the insurgents or rebels may restore the tranquility of the Commonwealth, and which, if suffered to pass unimproved, it may never be possible afterwards to recall," unquote. That's from Federalist 74. And it's this idea that actually leads to the pardons that are issued after the Civil War by both Andrew Johnson and Ulysses S. Grant for the former Confederates. It's this same idea that leads to Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter pardoning Vietnam draft dodgers. The framers believed that pardons, certainly in the case of insurrection or, resistance to the government, were a positive thing, that they might actually restore the tranquility of the state. So let me repeat that for those of you who may not be following me here. Pardons issued in the case of an insurrection or rebellion help restore the tranquility of the state. That's what Federalist 74 says. Alexander Hamilton, who is, of course, a hero today because of those kind of things. Clearly, the framers saw the almost plenary power of a pardon as a good thing, with the single exception, of course, of George Mason, who was concerned that presidents would issue pardons to protect themselves and their own power. So now let's jump to what's going on today. I have some theories. From here on out, it's pretty much my opinion today. The deal that fell apart for Hunter Biden was problematic. I don't think you're going to find anybody that disagrees with that. In fact, I haven't seen the headline yet, even from the New York Times, saying the deal was perfectly good. I don't understand why it was rejected. But I will tell you this, and this is something that I've thought about quite extensively. This deal that blew up required a GOP-appointed judge. More importantly, even better than a GOP judge, a Trump-appointed judge. The deal was unconstitutional. I think we've talked that to death. The fact that it violates the separation of powers. It requires the judge to make a finding about charging. It was unconstitutional, which the judge questioned. But they weren't counting on that being read. They weren't counting on the amicus briefs that pointed this out. They wanted this to go through, have the judge sign off on it. If it's a Trump-appointed judge, it's great. Why? Because later on, when Hunter's further misadventures become obvious, they have to go back to the judge. Should we charge him or not? Do you find that we should charge him? Well, if the judge says no, because the deal is in place and gives him immunity, well, there you go. But if the judge says yes, then we impeach the judge for an unconstitutional immunity deal. We point out the fact that she was Trump appointed, he or she was Trump appointed, and see Trump was appointing judges that violate the law. Never will it be pointed out that, well, you wrote the agreement. Yes, but the judge approved it. My number one theory about what's going on today is that a new deal will be reached very, very quickly. It would not surprise me within the next month to have a completely new deal for Hunter in place. The new deal, whatever it is, will be utterly incomprehensible to the average American citizen. You'll read it and you'll go, I have no clue what they're talking about. But this deal must be reached. Now, I'm not saying must in the sense of it's best for the American Republic. I'm saying the deal must be reached because this is what the powers that be, read that however you will, need. Why? Let's say that there is no deal and Hunter Biden goes to trial. You already know what's coming. The potential is that anyone who might have known anything about what was happening could be exposed. Read into that what you will. But anybody who would have, should have, or may have known what Hunter Biden was up to and Joe Biden was up to is going to be exposed. Right? It distracts from the 2024 election. It makes the Democrats look bad. Of course, they'll screech that this is all GOP trickery, that the GOP judge didn't approve the deal, and so forth and so on. But questions will be raised about the Democrat Party and what they're doing, and so forth and so on. But most importantly, and this is the thing you got to keep in mind, what is the 2024 election all about from the Democrat standpoint? Anybody? Bueller? A trial of Hunter Biden, which might expose people who were involved, who should have known, all those kinds of things, that makes the Democrats look bad, would in fact distract from the Trump trials. It would distract from the Trump legal issues, which is why yesterday they charged Trump with even more stuff. Because if it distracts from that, then the average American might look at this and go, well, both of these parties could be a problem. What happens if the President Biden, swings some sort of Nixonian deal? Now, there are many people who believe that Nixon resigned because he had a guaranteed pardon from Ford, that was part of the discussion. I don't know if I believe that or not. It wouldn't surprise me, but I wasn't there. Hell, I was 11 years old. In fact, I was 10 years old. I was just days from being 11 years old. What happens if Biden swings a deal that he will step down as president after he issues a pardon to Hunter? And the deal is that he gets a pardon himself from Kamala Harris, who isn't going to win in 2024. Yes, I get it. It's political suicide. I get that it's Democrat Party suicide. If this were to happen, the Democrats would, you could just write it in stone. Ka-ching, they would lose in 2024. I wonder if Kamala Harris would even go through with it. I mean, I know what we all think of her. I know what we all expect of her, but is it possible that she would look at this and go, I don't want any part of that? This, by the way, is why they have to have this new deal for Hunter in place, and they have to have it very, very quickly. Politics is a funny game. What seems like a long time on a calendar in politics is very quick. The quicker this thing goes away in its entirety, the quicker we get back to Orange Man bad, which is the entire purpose of the 2024 campaign for the Democrat side. So will Joe Biden issue a pardon for his son? Well, I don't know, but I do know this. It's been officially denied